Okay, good afternoon and welcome to the latest edition of Lunchtime Learnings. I'm absolutely delighted and honoured to be joined today by Dorian and Gonsalves from the CEO of the Belvoir Group based in Grantham. Incredibly grateful for your time because I know you're a busy man, always reporting to the city. I see you on Bloomberg, Sky, you're absolutely everywhere. So thanks very much for your time. And how are you today?
Yeah, good to see you as well, Stephen. No, cheers for that lovely intro. We saying that, I mean, we're not actually as busy as we normally would be. I think it's the same across all agents. We're still doing plenty of business and still doing what we've always been doing, but I think there's just a bit less noise, isn't there, around because of the restrictions at the minute. And not having as much noise and distractions is quite useful. But yeah, all good, thank you.
Good. So tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into estate agency, and then how did you become the CEO of Belvoir? It's a bit of a
But
journey, that.
I was wondering how far back you wanted me to go. Then I think so if I start at sort of now, and mind you, I suppose I'm 46, Stephen. That's the bottom.
Yeah.
So I'm 46 now. So if I sort of look backwards and think about how this all started, I started with Countrywide, which I've never made any sort of secret of, and I think unlike some people, I'm very positive about Countrywide. Of how it used to be, because I remember the contribution that it made to the whole of the sector, where the training was fantastic. It was non-discriminatory, and what I mean by that is that with what I remember of Countrywide, bear in mind I started as a junior neg, so I started right at the very bottom. I started with the junior neg target, Stephen, where I had to sell, I think, 60 houses before I got a company car, and I'll come onto the cars in a second. It was a Ford Fiesta they were sort of giving the time. And honestly, there'll be thousands of people in property who remember exactly this. But when I say non-discriminatory, it was a results-based business, and that's what I particularly liked about it. I joined the Dixons subsidiary, which was, you can tell from my accent, it was Midlands based, and yeah, it was all about results. So it didn't matter how tall or short you were, or how fat or thin, or what colour you were, or what sex you were. It was just about results. Everybody had the same targets. All of the junior negs had to sell the same amount to get their, at the time, their reward, which was a whole Ford Fiesta on lease. But that was if you hadn't got a decent car, which I hadn't at the time. I was driving when I started my sales target. So this must have been something like, it was 1997 or 1998. Is that about right? Yeah, I've been in property for 22 years thereabouts. And the car I was driving at the time was 1983. It was a Fiesta XR2. You definitely remember those, Stephen. It was
Yes, I
just
do. Thank you. Yeah.
and honestly, it was
Slightly older than you.
but it was 1983, and this was late 90s, so this car was really old, and it used to leak more oil than it took in petrol. And on my first handful of viewings, it was embarrassing because the viewers used to, if the car wouldn't start, they'd sort of look out and sort of, feel really sorry for me. But and the bottom line, this message in all of that, and what I sort of remember most about the sort of first year or two Countrywide, was that actually I was hungry to achieve the targets, and I wanted the car because mine was just appalling at the time. And I think if you can bring people on who are hungry, and you can genuinely spend or have a framework where they understand how to do their job well, then actually that is such a recipe for success. And Countrywide got that very right, I think. And I don't know them at all now. I don't have any dealings with Countrywide. I suspect they still have got a lot of things right in that respect. But the training was very good, and I must admit I loved the training. And back when I started, just before I joined Countrywide, although I joined as a neg, I bought privately what was called the Certificate of Practice in Estate Agency, which was like the exam to sort of have at the time. Then it was a few £100s. I did it before I joined Dixons, and that helped me get a job with Dixons in the first place. So I had the technical knowledge from the course, and I still, I think self-improvement and development is so important. So I did that before I went into the sales job, and then Countrywide taught me the skills. That's actually how I started. And then over about a 5 or 6 year period, I was with Countrywide for 6 years, give or take, maybe, yeah, just touch longer than that. And I sort of went from junior neg to senior neg. I was a lister, a senior assistant branch manager, senior manager, executive manager. I went through the ranks, and I think what that sort of helped me to understand was really the nuts and bolts of estate agency or property from the ground level up. And I did learn a lot at Countrywide. I learned what a good manager and a bad manager looks like, which I didn't understand. I wasn't in my sort of, mid 20s at the time. So I did learn that at Countrywide, and I thought it was very valuable. And I also learned the sort of value of training, systems, consistency, because the corporates are very good in those areas. So that's actually how I started. So I joined, at the bottom line is I joined Belvoir in 2005. I have to stop and pause for a second when I think of these dates now, because just so many things happen. And so, yeah, 2005, I joined Mike and Steph Goddard in Belvoir. I became a director in 2006, and I headed up sort of all the revenue, the income generation side. And, if you cut me in half, I'm essentially a builder, Stephen, in terms of, I don't mean bricks and mortar. My building skills are appalling, DIY skills are appalling. But in terms of business building, I think in a business, you've got to have people. And if you're not this way inclined, you've got to have somebody with you, but you've got to be focused on business growth every single year, because if a business doesn't grow, it's essentially going backwards. Costs go up, salaries go up, you've got inflation and competition. So you've got to be in a sort of building frame of mind. So I became sales director in 2006. The role of a sales director is essentially to grow revenue in any business, and that was my job then. And then we floated the business in 2012. It took us about 2 years to prepare the business for float. It just takes such a long time. So we started the preparations in 2010, which is when I became MD, and then we floated at the beginning of 2012.
Wow, thank you. Amazing. I've got so many questions now for you.
Go for it.
So just trying to unpack everything you said. So for hunger, you said you were really hungry when you started. Where did you get that from? Were you born with it, or did you just is that something that just developed as you grew up?
I'll tell you what, you've got some tough questions, haven't you, really? So where did it come from? I'd say that actually, I guess, what exactly are you born with? I don't think humans are born with that many skills. So, maybe it's part of your development. I actually think more so I was a typical sort of early 20-something where I had, typical lad. I didn't have any direction in terms of career, and I could see people around me in my own sort of peer group, your friends and your sort of peers, and their lives were sort of moving ahead at quite a pace, and actually mine wasn't at the time. And I think it was the fact that I was starting to feel a bit left behind. I thought I've got to get myself some direction, and I'd sort of got a bit of a fire burning where I wanted to put all my heart and soul into something. And actually, I meet so many people in this line of work, and I think, and socially as well, where they've got this burning sort of desire to achieve something, but they haven't actually aligned it with a suitable output for this sort of burning desire, really. So, and I certainly didn't wake up one day and think I want to be an estate agent. That definitely wasn't the case. In fact, it was my brother who suggested it to me back in all those years ago, and he sort of gave me a nudge in the right direction. I lost my brother in 2012, so he's not around anymore, but
Sorry.
but his son sort of went in a similar direction. I gave him a nudge into a estate agency, and yeah, I think when you're in your 20s, it's good to have someone just to give you a bit of direction. So, look, have you thought about this? So I thought I'd try it, see how I got on. And like with any sort of role at Countrywide, you end up on a track, and I think so. I sort of. My first few years at Countrywide, I did learn from that. I think I'm very conscious about things like goal setting, which we can talk about if you wish. So I've taken, or I think I've taken, the good things out of my learnings in the first sort of 5 or 6 years, put them together with sort of the wisdom that you accrue, as you get older, and at sort of 45, 46, you start to feel a touch older now. It's when you can see the greying or the white starts to happen, and but
Thanks.
in many ways, that's just, I just keep cutting mine shorter and shorter until eventually you won't know what colour it is. Yeah, I've sort of weaved what I think is sort of the magic that I've learned at Countrywide in the past, together with the independent frame of mind. Because if there's a downside about the corporates, is that they're not very nimble, they're not very quick at taking on new ideas or changing. But actually, we're still a relatively small company in the scheme of things, so we're still agile enough to change. And we saw this in 2020. That 2020 actually was a good test of how agile a company was in terms of changing quickly. And the news flow, back in the start of the lockdown last year, was just every day the news was coming out thick and fast. So I think really companies stood or fell on how quickly they could adapt to that changing environment last year. But I say we're still small enough to be pretty agile in the scheme of things.
Cool. You're just making me want to ask even more questions. I want to go back to where we were on the hunger. So as a business owner now, recruiting and getting the right people in the right seats of the bus is a challenge. How would you go out and find those hungry people? Obviously you can hire an attitude and you can train the skill. Are they out there? Where do you find them? Because I know staff and people, this is a people business, and makes a big difference. Where do you find these exceptional people who've got that desire and a hunger?
Yeah, I mean, do you know? I mean, the short answer is they are definitely out there, but actually, it's quite a struggle to find them. And especially when, on one hand, you would imagine that the jobs market is pretty tough at the minute because of, you read the press, you see the numbers of people on furlough. But actually, I think furlough is acting as an anaesthetic. I think when furlough is withdrawn, then actually things will start to become real. So there'll be more people out there looking for jobs and a lot more activity in the job sector, which I think will be quite helpful in some ways, unhelpful in others, but helpful in some. So the people are definitely out there without any doubt. And, if I had any tips to share, I think with recruitment, definitely don't rush into it. If it takes you 3 months to recruit the right person, it's definitely worth waiting rather than rushing in and getting the wrong person. So that's sort of one definite tip to share. I also think sort of setting out the job properly in the first place so that people can understand it. We're in a very fast data world where people now, bear in mind I haven't personally used Indeed, but we put jobs on there. I think from what we're seeing in recruitment at the minute, we're getting a lot of applications, but a lot of the wrong people applying for the job, and they're just simply ticking the box on Indeed and firing off mass sort of CVs to companies. So actually it means that your recruitment recruitment processes have actually got to be a lot better, I think, now than they needed to be 5 years ago, because you've got to get through all of this data, of the mass data, to get down to a core of people who've got the skills that you think you want. And then I think really having a decent interview process, whether it's telephone screening first of all, having more than one person in the interview, I've always found is very helpful, because people have different perspectives, and having a standardized interview process where you ask similar questions helps you to compare directly with answers that candidates are sort of giving you. So I definitely think they're out there, and I think the other route is recommendation. I don't think there's any more powerful way of recruiting than somebody saying, look, I know someone, you might have to approach them, but they've got the skill set, they've got the attitude, I've transacted with them and they're brilliant. It's that sort of, so it's the proactivity, I think, from a recruitment perspective, that will definitely help, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. So you also touched on, you learned the difference between a good manager and a bad manager. So let's talk about the qualities of a good manager. So
and then you'll ask me about bad managers afterwards.
No. I want to give people exceptional habits here. I want people to be world-class. So, what does a world-class manager look like, in your opinion?
Shall I tell you how I think I worked it out? And so then if this helps, it helps. If it doesn't, it doesn't. So I think, again, one of the good things about Countrywide was that there were a lot of people there. So you're in direct competition with negotiators if you're a negotiator, and you're in direct competition with managers if you're a manager. And my point is that if you're in competition with 30 or 40 managers in your subsidiary, I think that gives you an almost unique insight into, is that your dog or my dog?
Yeah, no, that's my dog. He's managed to get into the lounge, into the studio,
broken in.
And he wants to be let out.
Mine would have been much louder. I think it gave me a sort of unique insight into not well unique to Countrywide, in that if you can see the behaviours of 40 different managers, I think if you're willing to take the time just to observe the behaviour of those 40 people and sort of ask them questions about how they're winning business and how they manage their team, I think in a very short space of time you can work out what the common skill set is. And I think I did that simply because I wanted to progress. And nobody in life is going to say, I'm going to help you with your progression for the next 20 years. That never happens. You've got to be a self-starter. So I worked out what I thought were the best behaviours, and then tried to imitate those behaviours in my particular branch at the time, and it worked. Because there are common themes. Consistency is definitely one of them. So consistency in how you transact with your clients. I think clients have an expectation. If someone tells a client or a potential client how good you are, that client comes to you with an expectation. You've got to meet that expectation. Same with a new member of staff, same with a supplier, same with anything. And I think consistency in business is one of the most important things. And I use you as an example. You've created, Stephen, a consistent Stephen Brown brand. It's the same as it was when I met you 6 or 7 years ago. It's improved, but the brand and your style of operating is the same, as is mine. And I think that's, if you push this on it, that's deliberate. It hasn't happened accidentally. We've decided that we want to be consistent, and this is how we want to behave in sort of business. We want to be transparent. We want to be fair with people. And there's nothing worse, in my opinion, than an inconsistent manager. An example of an inconsistent manager is a manager who you're not sure whether they'll be in a good mood or a bad mood when they get to work in the morning. That's just, that's an inconsistency, isn't it? But actually, I think that's really uncomfortable for people to work in that sort of environment. So I think I've got a responsibility to be consistent, and my management team has a responsibility to be consistent. So I think consistency is part of exceptional behaviour, Stephen, if that's just my opinion. I think another exceptional behaviour, which I always find it odd when I say this, but I think actually keeping your promises as an individual or as a business, I think is unusual these days. It's certainly, I personally don't believe it's the norm. If you look at your interactions with people and businesses, and whether it's, I don't know, BT, Vodafone, whatever it might be, a lot of these interactions just lead to disappointment at the end of the process, and it's either because you're expecting too much and they haven't delivered, but quite often you sort of feel misled by the advertising or what you're expecting, and the performance doesn't meet your expectations. So I think keeping your promises massively important, and if you want to build a successful team around you, people have got to trust you, and they will never trust you if you you sort of change the deal, or you're not true to your promises or arrangements that you've put in place.
Lovely. So you manage, or you're CEO of a massive group. So you've got Belvoir, you've got Newton Fallowell, you've got Lavelles, God, going to test me
Northwood.
out. You've got Northwood, you've got
Mortgage Advice Bureau.
Mortgage Advice Bureau. So how do you deal with the stress, if it is stress? Maybe it's just fun of having the responsibility of knowing that you've got to feed all those mouths effectively.
Do I think there are only certain times when it feels stressful, and so I'd say that because and I've got a lot of managers with me who've grown up in this business, and what I mean is we've been here a long time. This is my 16th, or so, I think in April it's 16 full years for me, coming into sort of 17th year in this business, and I've got people with me who are just shy of that. And I think that because we've done it for so long, you tend not to get stressed by the general day-to-day run-of-the-mill things that happen. Last year was probably a good example. We had a good year last year. We didn't lose a franchisee for either COVID health or COVID business reasons, and we achieved our pre-COVID business plan. So it was, in general terms, it was a good year for us. But
well done.
Thank you. But the first part of the year was particularly difficult, and it's the unpredictability that that COVID cast across us all. The way I sort of liken it is to, in February, March, and April last year, it was like a fog had descended across all businesses, and we couldn't see our hand in front of our face, so we had to guess where to go next. And actually, that was particularly difficult for businesses. So I wouldn't say that was I'd be lying if I said it was anything but stressful for everybody in almost every business. I think it was. But after 5 or 6 weeks, when the fog started to lift somewhat, and of course we were unlocked faster than most sectors, that actually then the stress levels sort of went down, and off we went as relatively unscathed, which was great.
Brilliant.
So no, I'm generally a positive nature. Whenever you talk to me, I'm normally smiling, and it's generally very positive about things.
Brilliant. I want to come back to something that you said before, and so does my dog by the sounds of things. He agrees. What question do you want to ask? Come here, come and ask a question. Come on, good boy.
If I hadn't got an earpiece on, yours would have started mine off now, but mine's outside the door.
I'll tell you what, I'm just going to open the door and let him out. So bear with me 1 sec. There you go. Nothing like a live broadcast, is it?
That's it, right? Always the best.
We have to see where that ends up. It's like the kids in the background when they're interviewing somebody in the BBC. So what I loved was your mindset before you started the Countrywide job, and you talked about going and doing the technical work and learning all about it. I think that's absolutely fantastic and incredible, and a credit to you. And there's a lot of people now that I'm talking to that want to become estate agents. That's got to be great advice, to go and do. And there's some great courses out there. And actually now there's great content on YouTube and Google. What made you decide to actually do that? Because I think it shows a person that you were and what you've become all those years ago, to have that mindset.
There are two bits to it. So one bit is that I like to become, and my style of operating, I like to be technically correct. And so because I wanted to be technically correct, I bought the Certificate of Practice and Estate Agency, which is no different to the NFOP qualifications now. And this is a sort of 12-month course. You got some initials after your name if you want to use them. It's slightly different to how it is now, but it's all the process is exactly the same. And you had to go and sit physical exams for this particular course. I think it was 4 sets of 3-hour exams at the time, and I knew that would help me to become technically correct. That was one part of it, and I had a hunger to be technically correct, which I thought, rightly or wrongly, would help me sell more houses or book more mortgage appointments or do more lettings or whatever I was doing at that time. And the second part of it was that I understood very quickly that estate agencies are competitive business. It's competitive between brands and businesses and independents and corporates. It's really competitive, and then within the corporates it's very competitive amongst individuals. And actually I wanted to set myself apart as different. I wanted to show my employer that I was better qualified than the people around me, and I'd done that by choice. It wasn't expensive, but interestingly, I've never thought it better this way, Stephen, but that course has actually cost me more than my car did at the time. So the car I was driving and my viewings was about 300 quid. That course I think was 400 at the time. So, but you've got to make your choice, haven't you, and stand by it. And I thought that it didn't take me long to do the course, about 3 months. And then, as I say, I started with Dixons very early on. I had a brilliant area manager at Dixons, a guy who's still in property to this day. He's such a brilliant sort of area director, and he taught me so much. So.
Because this really fascinates me here, about self-development and training, and people investing in themselves. So, last week I put on a masterclass, and I've had a couple of people approach me after, can I have the recordings? And of course they can if they pay for it, which is absolutely fine. But they haven't gone to their bosses to say, can you pay for recordings? They've invested out of their own pocket because they want to learn. And, that for me, that tells me, right, what, these people are going to go far because they're happy to self-develop. They don't want to be, think they know it all. And I think that's great. And it's fantastic when people do it. And I still can't get my head around where I went to Eric a couple of years ago, and there's 6,000 people there, and 4,000 people are investing in themselves. Whereas here, it just seems that people expect their bosses to pay for them to go on the training. And I think what you showed is, look from where you started to where you are now, and your incredible journey in such a quick time. And to me, there's a massive lesson that you started on. Right, how can I get ahead of the game? How can I be different? And that's a massive takeaway. So thank you for sharing.
Do you know, the one word that I picked up in all of that is investment, Stephen. So, and you said it quite late on, that actually, if as a person you want to be more valuable to your employer, or you want to start a business, or or you want your business to be worth more long term, the key word is investment. So you have to invest in yourself. Otherwise, those things will never happen. And the investment could be, I guess, shadowing somebody else, learning from other people. But the easiest way and the fastest way is definitely, it's either training, qualifications, mentoring programs. But I think the value is just huge. So I think people are probably put off by the price tag of certain things. But in the scheme of things, I haven't really come across any courses that I didn't think were value for money.
Okay, so you talked about business growth every single year. So if I was starting my business today, where would I go and find some landlords? Where would I go and find some vendors? What's the best way if I'm a newbie to start off? And then, once I've started to gain some traction, how can I get that, I don't know, double digit, triple digit growth every year? What's the secret recipe? I'm not asking much, I know.
It's all right. It's all right. Hold on a second. I've just pressed something and lost my screen. I've got it. You're back. So actually, I've got a team of sort of BDMs, if you like, who help cold starts. What I'm coming on to is that we haven't actually been cold starting for a while, Stephen. So we about 5 years ago, we took the decision. We just had a change in business style. Whereas previously we'd built the network by means of mostly cold starts. What I mean by a cold start is exactly what you just described. So someone joins us, no experience, virgin territory, and then we give them all the skills and experience and tools and information, marketing material to be able to do exactly what you just said. So that was our older way of operating. In the last sort of 5 years, we've put more effort into growth by acquisition. So actually, if you said, Dorian, I want to join your network today, I'd probably recommend that you joined by means of acquisition. And all you're doing really by taking on acquisition and rebranding it at the same time and becoming part of a network. And we don't do lots of these, but we do some of these each year. And we've done about 100 of these acquisitions over the last 5 years. So, fair number. All you're doing is saving yourself about 5 years of hard work. So you enter at a much higher point rather than entering at the bottom, which actually entering at the bottom can be very hard work. And I guess that, I've got my views of sort of home run agents and cold starts. I think that cold starting is a lot of hard work and it's also quite high risk. And that's whether you're starting in a shop or working from home. I'm not saying the risk isn't worth taking, but you've got to be a really, really driven individual and you've got to have enough funding without excessive debt to pull that off. Preferably cash if you can, which takes pressure off when you start up. My advice would be to go down the acquisition route. And franchisors like ours, it's not just us doing it, other franchisors do the same, but they may help you with funding to buy these acquisitions, with cash to buy them. They'll certainly help you find the acquisition, and then they will help you sort of with all the skills that you need to become proficient to manage that business, and then you can grow it from that point.
Okay, brilliant.
But I think, if you pushed me and said, well, Dorian, if you did cold start, what would you do?
That was my next question.
I did, and you haven't shown me any of these phones. So if you sort of push me on it, it's the proactivity, Stephen, and this hasn't changed over the last 20 years. And so it's taking the time to use all your marketing channels, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's Facebook, Twitter, which I tend to use, Instagram, whatever, plus sort of local media. But it's taking the time to be proactive in getting your message out on all of these channels. You can almost wrap it up. It's the old sort of canvassing and door knocking, isn't it, in many ways, but in a different way to suit the more electronic world. But it's the proactivity. Yeah.
Lovely, thank you. You've got a lovely library behind you.
You can't see any dodgy titles that I shouldn't have on there. I don't think.
Any book recommendations for people listening or watching today that's made a difference to you?
Do you know? Well, I think your dog's sneaked back in again.
Yeah, now somebody's walking past.
Right.
He's unbelievable.
It makes it really real. So, which is nice. I'm not really a bibliophile as such. I mean, I think to be a bibliophile, you've got to own about 1,000 books, which some people do. But I do love books, and I've got a fair number of them. But I love reading more than I love the books. So I use Kindle as well as normal ones. So actually, in terms of sort of reading recommendations, there was one. I love goal setting, Stephen. This is one of the things that I think is one of the most valuable things that you can do in a business, and that's goal setting, where you genuinely think about what you want the future to look like. You break that down into goals. You believe in those goals, and then you go and make them happen. But you've got to do it in that order. You've got to first of all decide what the future looks like. I think quite often people try to goal set, but they haven't visualized what where this is going to lead to, either short, medium, or longer term. And one of the best goal setting books that I read, and I remember reading this on holiday years, which is sad but true, when I was about 30. So it was before we floated. It was not long after I joined Mike and Steph Goddard. And it was a book written by a chap called Brian Tracy. I'm not into self-help books. This book it's called Maximum Achievement. The guy sold millions of copies. And what it is, it helps you define, it's a goal setting book. That's essentially what it is. It doesn't look like it is from the cover, but that's what it is. And it helps you break your goals down into sort of personal goals, business goals, financial goals, because, the route to happiness isn't necessarily just having a good business. It's, a balance of your personal life, your health, everything else that goes with it. And this book helps you do that, but it's not just for business. It's the whole kind of picture. And what I did was I sort of worked through this book, and at the end of it, I ended up with a 5-year sort of financial and sort of business plan in my own mind. It helped me to formulate what my vision of the future looked like. So that one book actually is recommended. I've bought a few copies over the years for people. I think it's good. That's the only one of his books I've read. I probably should be sensible and read the rest of them, really, but I found that one particularly useful.
I think you want to Eat That Frog. I'm sure that's one of his books as well. Eat That
Is
Frog.
It really? Yeah.
Yes. So
there are now so many of them. It's quite difficult to know which ones are good ones. But I guess your recommendations are probably the best. But I said that one book for me was the one I remember most, I guess.
Brilliant. So again, I agree. Goal setting to me is incredibly important. Would you say you should start with a 5-year plan and then work to where we are to today?
Do I think that was what mine was. Mine was a 5-year plan, and in terms of the PLC, we have a sort of 3 to 5 year plan. I think it's difficult to go much beyond 5 years. Is my personal view. You might have a super recipe for making that happen, but I personally, I think any longer than 5 years is tough. Actually, going as far as 5 years is quite tough. But actually, if you can put the effort into defining a 5-year plan, the strange thing was when I put that plan together based on that book and the goal setting tips that it sort of had, it sort of forced me to make a plan. I shoved the plan in the drawer, in a drawer. Then a few years later, I've still got it, Stephen. It's actually in my drawer next to me. It was all those years ago. I wrote about 10 pieces of A4 while I was doing this book, and I shoved it in my drawer, and that's where it is. And I've kept it for posterity, because subconsciously, if you've taken the time to define your roadmap, you just wander along that road. It influences almost every decision that you make because you've taken the time to write that plan. So yeah, hugely important.
And how frequently are you reviewing it then, or were you reviewing it?
So that particular plan now, so that was a sort of personal and business plan. And I think as a business, we've changed a lot, in the last sort of 15 years. So now I have a lot of our planning is so part of it is strategy, which isn't just me. That's a board of directors. I've got Michael Stoop, who's a lovely chap, massively experienced. He's our chairman. We've got brilliant sort of non-exec. We've got Louise George, very skilled CFO, and of course Mark Newton, who ran Newton Fallowell at the time. We acquired the business, and Mark stayed with us. So the strategy is something that we do generally together, and then coupled with that, if you've got a business strategy, somebody somewhere has got to work out whether you can pay for it or not, and whether it's going to work and make you money, or whether it's going to sink the ship. And that's normally the chief financial officer or the FD that would work that out. And so Louise does that. So actually our planning is different, very different to how it used to be, where I'd write a plan and then try and make it happen. Now it's very much a team sort of team thing, which is very valuable, because if you put something together as a team, everybody buys into it. If you put it together as an individual, you've then got to sell it to everybody, and it's just a different way of doing things.
How do you get, I mean, that's interesting, and I'll be quick because I'm conscious of time and I'm very grateful of your time. So how do you get that buy-in from your team on the plan?
Yeah, so I think really just involving them step by step in putting the plan together. So if I break it down to this year's sort of plan, if you like, the way we put our budgets together is that the managers contribute to their particular part of the budget, and Louise controls the sort of budgeting process. So as a board, we've decided what we want to do. The managers then make contributions individually, and the sum total of those contributions form your sort of financial forecast going forward. Then that's either in line with your strategy or it needs some tweaking. So you can tweak either the strategy or the financial plan, or both. But I think all it comes down to really, Stephen, is just involving everyone in the process early on. Then actually you don't have to win hearts and minds, because they feel that they own a part of that plan. The last point on sort of business planning and goal setting is then this brings you back to what we said right at the very beginning with the car target, the Ford Fiesta Z-Tech as it was, and my old car, is that actually you've got to peg the right incentives to the right goals. And then if you get that right, my involvement is relatively minimal. I've got brilliant managers around me who, they know what their goals are, they know what their incentives are. If I interfered with them every day, I just wouldn't be helping. They're skilled people. But what we certainly get right at the beginning of the year is that we get the goal setting right, we get the incentives right, and then actually business starts to gather momentum, which as a business we have got.
Lovely. And somebody's just asked, how do you find out what the right incentives are? What are the right questions that they should be asking to find out? Because people are very motivated by different things. Obviously, you were motivated by Ford Fiestas and better cars, but that may not have motivated your colleague.
Do you know, that's right, but it's difficult these days, isn't it, to have different incentives, because then if you've got 6 people and they've all got different incentives, you've got to be so careful that the incentives are fair. Otherwise 5 people can be sitting there thinking, well, that's just not cricket, it's a different, his or her incentive is better than mine. So I think that brings you back to consistency. So in my mind, given 6 people, if they're doing the same job, I'd want them to have the same incentive for a start. I wouldn't want that to be any different. But I think the bottom line is that you've got to talk to your staff. And I'll give you an example of this, Stephen. That at the start of last year, I think, like a lot of companies in property, we were struggling on the recruitment side to replace good people with either good or better people. And that had been a real challenge for some time. And the feedback that I was getting from my HR person, who I trust implicitly, she's been with me for since the day dot, was that we need to increase holiday entitlement and a few other benefits. So we did, and I announced at our Christmas party, not just gone because we didn't have one before, that we're increasing holiday entitlement. We're increasing that we're putting on parking spaces for staff, just a bunch of sort of incentives. Interestingly, within 3 months of announcing that, the world turned to custard, and now we're having a lot of people inquiring. So we don't have that problem anymore. But it just shows that you've got to listen to people. And I think the further up the management scale you get, the more important it is to listen to people and go and talk to people, and not just accept your own thinking and what incentive should be right. And you're right, different things do motivate different people. My default though is consistency with that. So I think our business pretty well, Stephen, and that for instance, amongst our franchise network, contracts are the same, the deals are the same. We don't go out and do while deals with people, we tend to keep things the same. And the reason for that is that if we then have a group of people in one room, that they kind of know what everyone else's deal is. It's all fair. It doesn't depend on how loud that you shout or how popular you are. We're very consistent in that approach. I'm not sure whether that helps or not, but
no, but you know what? I think you've given a really clear message today about consistency, and I agree. That's definitely my favourite C word, consistency.
Is it really?
Yeah,
Come on to one of your training courses then, really, shouldn't I? Really, I can agree with you.
That's what I talk about. I ask a question, do you do this? And they go, yes. I said consistently, and they go, no.
No, that's it. Consistency is really important. If you look at all the favourite, I'm not a huge. I like McDonald's, for instance. That's a franchise. I'll get the F word in there really quickly. I think a lot of us are fans of McDonald's. You've got to ask, why do we like it so much? Isn't that the most consistent takeaway that you deal with? They know exactly how many fries are going to be in the box. You know exactly what it's going to taste like. You know exactly how quick it's going to be prepared. And it's that consistency that keeps people coming back, because they're going to get exactly what it is they're expecting. When you're running a smaller business like I am, and you are, Stephen, and most estate agents are, consistency is so hard to achieve, but it's got to come from the top down. And then you've got to put so much effort into trying to maintain that consistency but it's worth it in the end.
Fantastic. One final question. Knowing what you know now, what would you do differently if you were starting all over again?
Crikey, that's a really, really tough question to ask. I was looking at my goal setting at the start of this year, and I got married in December, as you know. My wife bought me thank you. My wife bought me one of these. It's called the 6 Minute. I'm sure it's called the 6 Minute Diary. It's one of these books that kind of
fantastic.
You use for self-reflection, all that sort of stuff. I've never used one before. And actually, one of the questions in that book is what you asked me, and I haven't answered it in the book. I'm not sure I can even answer it now for you. But the question in that book was, if you were talking to yourself of 10 years ago, what would you say to them? What advice would you give them? I think, hand on heart, I wouldn't do that many things differently. That's the truth of it. I think I would have done some things faster, and I would have avoided other things. I also think that I suppose when it comes down to training, I'll give you one example. So we're estate agents and property people at heart. That's what we are. That's I've told you what my history is, and my team is very similar. When you become a PLC, you have to learn a whole new set of skills. We're accountable to shareholders, and we have to abide by a set of rules, and the rules are extensive. So you have to learn almost a new language, if you like, when you become a PLC. That was a really steep learning curve for us. We had to learn that. In just a few months, we had to sort of crack on and sort of learn that. So I think probably having a better understanding of the mechanics of sort of PLCs and that language back in 2010 would have helped me in 2012. But actually, what's helped us succeed as a PLC is that we are property people at heart. So I wouldn't sacrifice one for the other, but I think having that as an additional set of technical skills would have been pretty useful for me. I think that's yeah.
Fantastic. Well, look, I'm incredibly grateful for your time. You've been a great guest. I want to thank everybody for watching as well, or listening. Next week, I'm going to be joined on Tuesday by Vanessa Warwick of Property Tribes. So we're going to be talking about all things landlords. And then on Thursday, I'm joined by Regan Bradley, who's the operations director of Paramount Properties in Northwest London, who works with the exceptional Spencer Lawrence. I just want to say a massive thank you to all the suppliers and estate agents that have got behind the computers for homeschooling up to now, and about £1:15 on the 21st. There's been £16,380 raised, which is absolutely incredible. I've got pledges of another 14,000 to come in. computers and tablets have gone out to 20 people and 20 schools, who I can't tell you how appreciative they are. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everybody for your donations, and estate agents, please, and letting agents, tag your suppliers in, get them involved. There's enough people out there, Rightmove, Zoopla, on the market, other companies. If we can get involved. One of the emails that came through from a school yesterday up in Stoke-on-Trent was, it is just making a massive difference. So I just want to say a massive thank you to everyone that is contributing. Have a great Thursday afternoon. Thank you all for listening. Dorian, thank you for being an amazing guest, incredibly grateful, and I look forward to seeing you next Tuesday. Thank you. Bye.
Take care.